L'kuta Sichas Chelek Yud Zayin Tzav Beis Lilu Nishmas Rabbi Yosef Ben Yamin Ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman Rashi Sicha, the very beautiful twist in explaining that this Rashi is really a continuation to another Rashi, and that's how we explain and understand this Rashi. Very beautiful, a halachic application based on the wording of the Rashi here, and Hashem in the balance that is necessary in our lives. Aleph, from Pasuk Eish Tamid Tukad Al Mizbeach Leisichba, the Pasuk in this beginning of this week's parsha, where it speaks about the fires on the Mizbeach. It says Eish Tamid, a constant fire, Tukad Al Mizbeach, should burn on the Mizbeach Leisichba, it shall not be extinguished. Is Rashi Maitik Deverter Eish Tamid? Rashi quotes the words Eish Tamid from the Pasuk when it's Mefarish and explains as follows: Eish Shenemar Ba Tamid, Hu Shemadlikim Ba Esanedis. A fire that it says by it, the word tamid, is what is used to light the menorah. Shenemar bo lalis ner tamid, because the menorah also has the word tamid. So since the mizbeach is tamid and the menorah is tamid, af hi me'al hamizbeach achitzin tukat. When it says eish tamid tukat al mizbeach, it means that the menorah will be lit, will be kindled from the fire on the mizbeach achitzin and the outer mizbeach. Which is very interesting because we're discussing Mizbeach, and Rashi brings in that this pasuk is about Menorah. The Pashtus Lentman, as Rashi meant to Bavarnen, the word Tamid. On a basic level, we understand that Rashi is addressing the word Tamid, but that's which seems to be extra. If the purpose is to teach us that the fire in the Mizbeach has to burn non-stop, what would have been enough to say that the fire in the Mizbeach should not be extinguished, as it says in the previous pasuk. What is the word tamid adding to what we already know? Therefore, Rashi says, since the word tamid is, with regards to the Mizbeach, is not teaching us anything, it must be teaching us something about the menorah. But very ungeruf ner tamid, the menorah is called a ner tamid, as ir tukad hadlaka, that its lighting, its kindling, kum tvanesha Mizbeach, should come from the fire of the Mizbeach. But if this is what Rashi is coming to accomplish, if Rashi is just explaining the word tamid, that the word tamid is here extra in the pasuk, because this pasuk is talking about the eish on the eish of the fire of the menorah. This raises a number of questions. Question Aleph: Die ganze parsha da red wegen dem Mizbeach v'inyanov, keil wegen eish of Mizbeach. This whole section of Chumash is talking about the Mizbeach, including the fire of the Mizbeach. So, according to that, how does the menorah kick in? How would you all of a sudden bring in the menorah, especially Pshutei Shel Mikra? Pshutei Shel Mikra is that this is a section discussing the Mizbeach and the fire in the Mizbeach. Das was their pasuk is meisib den vart tamid. Then if you're going to say, well, there's an extra word tamid, it can be learned very simply. As the pasuk zoktus to the tastes ad gashav and tmidos. The pasuk wants to overly emphasize the importance of the constant fire, and to be said in a positive way. Later in the pasuk it says leisichba, it should not be extinguished. So the pasuk wants to also say positively that it should be constantly lit. The fire on the Mizbeach has to be constant without any break, without a stop. As the Even Ezra, versus from the Rosh Pashtani Amikra, Taich Take, as the word Tamid, kommt Meisiv sein, the minion for Tmidus, Mizbeach. We actually find the Even Ezra, who is one of the leading commentators on in the Pshat, in the simple meaning of the pasuk. He interprets the word tamid, that is just an extra emphasis of the importance of the fire and the Mizbeach being lit constantly, being burning constantly. So our question on Rashi is just say the word tamid is for extra emphasis, and then you have no extra word, and you don't have to bring in the menorah, which is totally not the topic at hand. Uchachas od der Pirush in Rashi is genommen from Midrash Razal. Rashi didn't make this up. Rashi is gleaning this from the Midrashim, from the teachings of Chazal. Is doch Yedua v'shen geret filamol as a filu Midrash Chazal was Rashi brings in Pirush Yalatera seinen Muchrich to the Mikra. Rashi only brings Midrashim that are necessary and that have to fit in to the understanding of Sudish Mikra. Ubefrat when der Pirush wird in Rashi nicht gebracht mit dem Lashon Rabbi Seinu Darshu verkehrt, especially if Rashi doesn't add the words Rabbi Seinu Darshu that our sages expounded. Was von dem ist verstandig, as der Pirush is noch mehr muchrig from Pshat HaKsuv Matzmei. By not saying Rabbi Seinu Darshu, this emphasizes to us even more that Rashi sees this Pirush as something being necessary in order to understand Pshuti Shal Mikra. So the question is why? So our question, Aleph, is why does Rashi bring in a din about menorah if we're talking about the mizbeach, and if there's an extra word tamid, just say that it's for an extra emphasis. And the fact that it's brought in Midrashim does not mean that Rashi would bring it, especially without of a Rabbi Seinu Darshu, unless Rashi felt that this was Pshuti Shal Mikra. And the question is, why does Rashi have to say this? Why can't Rashi just say that Tamid is for extra Tmidus, extra emphasis of Tmidus? Base. Nochmer. The question gets stronger. Rashi alei not freer mefarish given in the previous pasuk. This pasuk Eish Tamid Tukah, this pasuk Vav. In the previous pasuk Hey, Rashi says as riva kan yikidos harbe. That the pasuk mentions many times words with the shadish of yikida, which means fire or burning fire, lighting fire. Al moikda, ve'eish hamizbeach tukad bei, ve'eish al hamizbeach tukad bei, eish tamid tukad al mizbeach. So Rashi says in the previous Rashi that there's many times that where this section, this parsha, says the word yikidos, either moikda or tukad. Kula nidrishum mesechas yuma. All of these yikidos, all these terms of burning fire or lighting fire, are explained in Masechta Yuma. There's a machlekes over there. How many fires were on the Mizbeach? How many fireplaces? How many fire structures, setup were on the Mizbeach? Well, and just to give a little glimpse, because it's going to become relevant later in the Sikha, one opinion holds there was 2 marachas on the Mizbeach. There was one maracha gedola, big fire that was where everything was, where all the karbanos were being brought, and a second smaller maracha, a smaller fire, was so that way they should have a fire to be able to kindle, take a fire from there to burn the ketores on the Mizbeach hapnimi. So they would take fire from the outer Mizbeach to the inner Mizbeach. A second opinion holds that there was a third fire. That was for the purpose of, in case the main fire, the Maracha Gedola, would begin to get weaker, they would take fire from this third Maracha. Then there's an opinion that holds that there was 4 fires. The 4th fire was for the Evarim Updarim, the pieces of the animal that were not burned by the end of the day. So there was another fire where the Evarim Updarim would get burned. So Rashi is saying that the fact that there's a number of different times where it says the word tukad or moikda, the mention of fire, is referring to the various different fires that were on the Mizbeach. Now, one of the psukim that Rashi mentions is Eish Tamid Tukad, our pasuk. Das heißt, dass der pasuk Eish Tamid Tukad v'gemer redt gegen eine von die marachis, wir sind genau vom Mizbeach. So the way we understand the Rashi is that each of these yikidos, tukad or moikda, is referring to one of the marachis, one of the fires on the Mizbeach. So Eish Tamid Tukad, one of these psukim, is referring to one of the marachis, to one of the fires. Heint. So if you already understand that Eish Tamid Tukad from our pasuk is referring to the fire of the Mizbeach, then how could Rashi say that it's referring to the fire of the Menorah? Gimel Nachmer, the question gets even stronger. In the dem pasuk gufa, is Rashi gleich mefarish as siyume leisichba geit auf Eish Mizbeach. The next Rashi on this pasuk Vav, Rashi says the fact that it says Lo Sichbe in this pasuk, and the fact that it says Lo Sichbe in the previous pasuk, this teaches us that if the mizbeach, if the fire of the mizbeach gets extinguished, it's too lavin. If the person is over, if the person let it become extinguished, is over and too lavin, the Lo Sichbe from last pasuk and the Lo Sichbe from this pasuk. But that means that Rashi himself is saying that this pasuk Lo Sichbe is talking about the fire of the mizbeach. So let's just review very quickly. Our question is, why does Rashi introduce the menorah into a parsha that is talking, besides for this detail, only about the mizbeach and the fire in the mizbeach? It says the word tamid. Tamid means that it has to be it's an extra limud that the fire should be constant. The question gets stronger because in pasuk in Hey, Rashi, where he brings the ribo kan yikides harbe, seems to imply that eish tamid tukad is one of the marachas. He's talking about the fire in the mizbeach. And the question gets stronger because Rashi in this pasuk Vav says that Lo Sichbe is talking about a lav that would apply to extinguishing the fire of the mizbeach. So Rashi himself says that this pasuk is talking about the fire of the mizbeach. So why in this first Rashi of this pasuk does Rashi imply that the Eish Tamid is talking about the menorah? Beis. In Siv Beis, he's going to try to far enfer, he's going to try to answer the question and say that Be'etzem, the pasuk is talking about Eish al Mizbeach. And the word Tamid is to be able to learn from here a din that's relevant to menorah as well. That's the suggested answer, and this is what the Divrei David, how the Divrei David understands Rashi. And of course, the Rebbe is going to refute this answer. We could have, we may possible want to answer as some of the Mefarshim learn, as the posik Eish Tamid v'gen Mekisha la'atzmai is Rashi nit meitzim midei pshutei. That the pasuk itself, Rashi is not changing it from its simple understanding that it's talking about the ganzen pasuk, Retteg and the Marachav Mizbeach, and the entire pasuk is referring to the fire in the Mizbeach. Rashi kumt number farazim. Rashi is coming to say, as fundem var tomid do ba Mizbeach, the fact that by the Mizbeach, and we're talking about the fire of the Mizbeach, but because there's an added word tomid, is faran an uplearning of Eish menorah, we can also deduce something from here with regards to menorah. By welchen steht tamid, since it also has the word tamid, as eich angesunden werden von Eish Mizbeach. The chiddush over here is that the way we understood Rashi at first is that this pasuk is talking entirely about the Mizbeach, about the menorah. And on this we ask the question, why? And especially since there is an implication from Rashi in a number of places that he's talking about the Mizbeach here as well. So he says, yeah, you're right. This pasuk is talking about the Mizbeach. What Rashi means by bringing up the menorah is only a secondary limud from the Mizbeach to menorah, because the menorah also has the word tamid. So however, this is not smooth. It's difficult to explain this, to fit this into the words of Rashi. Why? Aleph, if this pasuk is about the Mizbeach, and the menorah is just being learned from here as a secondary thing, then Rashi should have introduced it by saying that from here we could learn, or our sages learned from here. But Rashi doesn't say any of that. Rashi seems to be teaching this pasuk that the menorah, that this pasuk is what the menorah is talking about. This pasuk is talking about menorah. Base Rashi is meitig von pasuk echt dem Wort eish. Und ich mit Pirushay teister zusammen mit dem Wort Tamid echt dem Wort eish. If Rashi was just addressing the word Tamid, then Rashi would have not included the word eish in the Dibur HaMaschil. Rashi says eish Tamid, and then when Rashi explains what eish Tamid means, again he uses the word eish. Eish shenemar ba Tamid. Das heißt, as Tamid is mitayr dem eish, was steht da in pasuk. That the word Tamid is not referring to the menorah, but the word Tamid is explaining the eish that's in this pasuk. Rashi and Gimel for Narichas Aloshim Pirish Rashi. So not only is Rashi say Eish Tamid in the Dibur HaMaschil, and not only is Rashi teaching that the Eish in this pasuk is referring to the Eish HaMenorah because it has Tamid. No, for Narichas Aloshim Pirish Rashi, the way Rashi elaborates in his words Af he may al hamizbeach chitzin tukar. This also it. The eish hamenoira will be lit from the mizbeach chitzin, and it's written in like a long-winded way. Is verstandig as a taish to sign in emshach hakosov. Tukar dalam mizbeach. The pasuk says eish tamid tukar dalam mizbeach. So Rashi is translating the whole pasuk. The eish that has tamid, meaning the menorah, tukad, should be lit may ala mizbeach, from the mizbeach. So Rashi doesn't seem to be learning that it's just the word tamid that's being learned from the mizbeach. The whole pasuk is talking about the menorah. So therefore, if you look at Rashi, the way Rashi writes the words, it does not seem like the Divrei David wants us to say that the pasuk is talking about mizbeach and menorah is a secondary limud. It seems that Rashi is teaching that mizbeach, that this pasuk is talking about menorah, and the hadar kushi leduchta. So we're back to our original question: why does Rashi change from Shutei Shal Mikra and bring in menorah? In Seif Gimel, he's going to address the question Beis from the first Seif, where Rashi in the previous pasuk brings the Gemara in Yoma, and Lecheres Astira in two Rashis. Rashi in this pasuk is telling us that Eish Tamid Tukad is talking about the menorah, and Rashi in the previous pasuk seems to imply that Eish Tamid Tukad is talking about the Mizbeach. So in Seif Gimel, he's going to bring Mefarshim that want to explain at least that, answer that stira, answer that question, and Rashi and the Rebbe will refute that as well. So there are certain Mefarshim that come to resolve the contradiction between these two Rashis. As the pasuk Eish Tamid Tukad al Mizbeach werden Masechta Yoma nit gedarshent beneged di Marochas was darfen sein auf Mizbeach. The pasuk Eish Tamid Tukad is not used in Yoma with regards to the Marochas. Now we learned of all Marochas from the Friedike Psukim. All four Marochas, even the day that holds of this four Marochas, four fires, learns them from the previous three Psukim. Al Moikda, Ve'eish HaMizbeach Tukad Bay, Ve'ho Eish Al HaMizbeach Tukad Bay, and the fourth Marocha is learned from the Vav of Ve'ho Eish. Ve'ho Eish, that's the fourth Marocha. So, therefore, it's not a stira, because Eish Tamid Tukad is not talking about the Marachas. Und das, was Rashi sagt, cool an the Drishum Mesechas Yuma b'minyan HaMarachas. And the fact that Rashi says that these are all discussed in Mesechta Yuma, when it discusses the machlekes of the Chachamim with regards to how many Marachas there were, it does not letzayin b'velchen inyin u'mispar Chazal darshan di psukim. It's only to tell us. Rashi is not going into the machlokes there, whether there was four, whether there was three, which psukim is going for which. It's just a citation. Rashi is just telling us where is it discussed, the number of maroches in Chazal. It's in Yuma. And the fact that there's Yikidus Harbe here is because it's related to the various different opinions of the maroches. Go look in Yuma over there. But Rashi is not saying that there's four maroches and these four Eish Tamid Tukads, these four Yikidos are referring to the four maroches, because that would be a question, so steer up to the other Rashi. So let's just say that Rashi is just telling you there's a lot of Yikidis here in this parsha. You want to get more information, look in the Gemara in Yuma. But Rashi is not saying that Eish Tamid Tukad is referring to one of the maroches, and therefore you could still say that Eish Tamid Tukad is talking about the menorah. That's how these Mefarshim want to resolve this stira between these two Rashis. That Rashi is not taking a position in the first Rashi that Eish Tamid Tukad is about the maroches. Rashi is just telling you, giving you a list of the Yikidais, and telling you, go look in Yuma. However, the Rebbe is not satisfied with this answer. According to how much we know how precise Rashi is in his wording, is moving as the Tiris is in Ganzen Ishgat, you understand that this Tiris is entirely not smooth. It doesn't fit in. If Rashi was only citing, referencing the location, the source of where these psukim are discussed, Rashi would have sufficed by saying these were all discussed in Yuma. Rashi very many times will send you to a certain Gemara, a certain Masechta. But Mela was an uncommon, so they're unnemen. Therefore, we must accept. If Rashi mentions the fact that there's a machlokes chachamim with regards to the number of marachis in the Geli Pirushay, it must be relevant to the Pirush. According to these mefarshim, the fact that there's a machlokes is not relevant to this Rashi, because Rashi is not discussing the 4, the 3, or the 2. Rashi, how many marachas there were? Rashi is just telling you, if you're wondering why it mentions the word Moikda or Tukat so many times, look in Yuma. If that was the pshat, then Rashi would have said, look in Yuma. The fact that Rashi says, the fact that Rashi mentions the machlekes means that Rashi feels that that the machlekes over there is relevant to what Rashi is trying to tell us here. And therefore, we're back to our question. The way Rashi explains it, Eish Tamid Tukad is about the marachas. And how does that fit in with his Rashi in our pasuk Vav, that Eish Tamid Tukad is about the Menorah? And see if Dalit is going to bring the Debir Basa. The Teichen von Wort Tamid is Rashi Mefarish Frier by the Menorah. The word Tamid is mentioned in Parshas Tzav, where it says, Vikru, catching a blank here. On Va'atat Tzav out of all Psuk. Va'atat Tzav es Bnei Yisrael. V'yichoi lach Hashem en zay zach. Kasis lamoyer. Laha lois ner tamid. So what does Rashi say about tamid? Kalayla v'layla kori tamid. Every night, if something is done every single night, is called tamid. In other words, you might think that tamid means constant. Every single second of the day. So Rashi says no. The fact that it was lit every night consistently is called tamid. Rashi means zeraya oilas tamid. In Parshas Pinchas, where it talks about the carbon tamid, he calls it a tamid. And it's only brought every day. It's not being brought constantly. So too in the Minchas Chavitin, Nemar tamid. Also the Minchas Chavitin, the pasuk says tamid, and yet half was brought in the morning, half was brought in the afternoon, but it wasn't constant. So Rashi is mechadish to us that the word tamid doesn't mean constant. The word tamid means consistent. If something is done every day, something is done every night, on a consistent basis, it's called tamid. If that's what Rashi tells us, that tamid does not mean constant, is doch schon schwer zu sagen, l'shitas Rashi, as der Wort tamid benitten die dann, kommt moisiv sein binyan atmidius. Binyan atmidius bisman, auf dem, was der Posek sagt, eish tukat gemer leisichba. Now it becomes very difficult to say that the Eish Tamid is an emphasis, is intensifying the Tamidius, the constantness of the time that the fire was burning. But Adrabah, Leisichba meint as the Eish Tav brennen on Iberais. Leisichba means that the fire has to burn non-stop, without stopping it. Aber Tamid can make an Eish Tamidius von Yamam Aleinu de Leilas Alein. Tamid could mean the consistentness of every day or every night. And within the day, it doesn't have to be the whole day, it can be part of the day. So now Rashi has a problem. Tamid is not adding to Leisichba. Tamid is almost taking away from Leisichba. Leisichba means never, non-stop. And Tamid doesn't mean non-stop. Und der Rebbe lernt Rashi. Therefore, Rashi cannot say, like we wanted to say in the beginning, in the first question, that Tamid, why don't we just say, like the Even HaEzer says, that Tamid is adding a Tamidi, is emphasizing the importance of Tamidius. In Pshuti Shal Mikra, it doesn't make sense, because Pshuti Shal Mikra, Tamid does not mean constant, it does not have to mean constant, and therefore, it's not adding anything to Leisichba. Und der Rebbe lernt Rashi, as when the Pasuk Eish Tamid, kum to Ter Marbazan and Anderesh. And therefore, Rashi is stuck, so to speak, with the word Tamid, that it does not fit in to be talking about the Eisham and the Eisham Mizbeach. Therefore, Rashi says it must be talking about a different Eish. But by your state, La'alis Ner Tamid, which actually has the word Tamid, as Medar for Malak Zam El Mizbeach, which actually had to be lit Tamid on a daily basis. Where did it come from? It came from the Mizbeach. So our first question is answered. Why does Rashi bring in Eisham and Neira over here? Because Rashi doesn't know how to fit in Eisham Mizbeach. Eisham Mizbeach, the word Tamid is doesn't make any sense. Sif Hey is going to bring in an incredible understanding of this Rashi and how the two Rashis don't contradict each other. Leid them is eich muvon was beis Rashi bringt früher up Yekidus harbe v'chulu. But before we could explain these two Rashis, he's going to bring three questions he's going to point out three difficulties in the first Rashi. Aleph is sich nicht mistapek mit sagen liebe kann Yekidus harbe. Verlassen dich sich as man wird allein lieber erzählen. Rashi does not suffice with saying that there's many Yekidas, many mentions of the fire here, and then rely on us that we'll count it out. Nor bringt alle erter eichten pasuk eish tamid. Rashi actually counts out, lists each time that it says the word tamid or moikda in this parsha, including eish tamid tukat from our pasuk. Beis arichis halashon from Rashi, riba chulu harbe. It says riba kan Yekidus harbe. It can zagin ubediuk arba Yekidus kan. He could have said there's 4 Yekidus here. Riba kan Yekidus arba. He mentions, he increased over here many mentions of the fire. He could have just said there's 4 mentions. Und Gimel, was nachdem wie sagt, kula nidishu mesechas yom is a meisiv, shenechleku Rabbi Seinu binyan amarachas shoyusham. Which is, this we asked this previously as well. That why does Rashi add in the words that the Chachamim that dispute the number of marachas there in the Gemara and Yuma? So now we're going to understand these 3 things. Warum Rashi is the Oisen Sumat Gezain. As the Pirus Da is Talui in the Chilukei Deis Zayin Dav Minyan Marachas. The way we understand this pasuk, the way Rashi explains this pasuk, is not simply according to everyone, but it actually depends on which daya you're looking at, which opinion you're following in the Gemara and Yuma. The machlokes in Yuma shenechleku Rabbi Seinu binyan amarachis, that is the basis to understand this pasuk according to this Rashi or otherwise. Vibal that's ribokan, since here in this section of I'll talk on him as Mizbeach, he added he has a lot of mentions of Yekidos. Is mistaber later b'shudishal mikra as Allah Yekidus wegen kam Mizbeach. So the simplest way to understand is that all the Yekidus here are talking to Mizbeach. Late their day was halt as is eine given 4 marachas jeden Tag. So if you're going and looking at the opinion that there were 4 fires on the Mizbeach every day, ubemele is eich der pasik eish tamid tukad al Mizbeach nichlel mit die psukim was reden wegen marachas am Mizbeach. And then Eish Tamid Tukad will be included in the 4 marachas. And even though we mentioned earlier that the day that holds that the 4 marachas, does not use the pasuk Eish Tamid Tukad, but he mentions in the order 24 that later on in the Gemara mentions what is Eish Tamid Tukad teaching me, and it's teaching me something with regards to the Maracha Shniya. So even though the source of the 4 marachas is maybe not from Eish Tamid Tukad, but the Gemara clearly tells us later that Eish Tamid Tukad is talking about Maracha Shniya. So according to the opinion that you have 4 fires on the Mizbeach, then these four psukim in our parsha are referring to the Arab marachas, and that makes the most sense. That's the traditional mikra. Ulei dem an de Amar hat Rashi nicht was zum Fahrer sein in dem pasuk. Rashi has nothing to say. There's nothing for Rashi to add. Only she does say we müssen bedege geinler in der Zeit von Tamid und derch wieder ben Even ben Ezra lernt eiket. And then there's a word Tamid. We'll have to learn like the Even Ezra that it's just an extra tmidius. Because we said before that it doesn't fit in because Tamid means constant, consistent. But to say that Eish Tamid Tukad is talking about the Mizbeach is much more pshudish mikra than saying that it's talking about the menorah. And therefore, according to the day that there were 4 marachas, the easiest and simplest way to learn this pasuk, these psukim, is that Eish Tamid Tukad is talking about the Eish Mizbeach. Lady andere day saber. But if you follow the other day is as seine given nicht mehr wie zwei oder drei marachis, either there were 2 marachis or 3 marachis. So now you have a problem. Now you have a pasuk eish tamid tukad. That is extra, seemingly. So Rashi mefarish azay haben eichai chacham to the mikra. What are they going to do with eish tamid tukad? Maybe that's a proof that they're wrong. Maybe it's a proof to the fact that there's only 2 or 3 fires, not 4. So therefore, Rashi says, no, you can even learn that there's 2 or 3 fires. There's next the pasuk eish tamid tukad. Is glatiker zu sagen, Kanal, warum Kanal is glatiker zu sagen as eish tamid in the menorah? Because then you could follow the easier way, the smoother way with regards to the word tamid that we're talking about the menorah. As tukad me'alam mizbeach, das ist der Pirush al pipsudish al mikra, und die Yekidis b'mizbeach seinen harbe mehr von eins aber nicht für. So then you would learn that there's Yekidis harbe, there's many Yekidis here, but they were not 4 Yekidis in the mizbeach. There were less than that. And the eish tamid tukad is talking about the menorah. In other words, mitzad ha'echad, it's easier to say that eish tamid tukad is the mizbeach, eish mizbeach. And the tamid you'll have to learn b'doichak. That will fit if you say that there's 4 fires in the mizbeach. Then you can use eish tamid tukad as one of the psukim. On the other hand, it's easier to say that eish tamid is talking about something that's not constant but consistent, which is the eish menorah. So therefore, if you have a day that says there's only 2 or 3 fires in the mizbeach, then it's geschmacker to say that tamid is referring to the eish menorah. So Rashi, when he says Rashi is telling us how to understand the pasuk, and the next pasuk is based on this machlekes. You got to go learn the machlekes. You got to understand the machlekes because it's not just relevant to there; it's relevant to this right over here. Is eish tamid referring to the menorah, to the mizbeach? It depends how many fires there were. If there's 4 fires, then eish tamid tukad is talking about the mizbeach. If there's only 3 fires or 2 fires, then you got an extra pasuk eish tamid tukad. Then you got a problem with the word tamid. So what am I going to do? I'm going to understand that it's talking about the eish menorah. It still didn't really explain why. Why would the pasuk want to introduce a din of menorah in the middle of mizbeach? Which was one of our questions. Our very first question was why does a din of menorah come in the middle of mizbeach? In the next seif, in the next seif, the Rebbe is going to bring a practical halachic application that is learned from this Rashi. And based on that, it'll make sense why the menorah is mentioned here. From the inyanim ufloim al derech halacha in Pirush Rashi, it's a inyanim ufloim because it's something that you are mamish not going to expect, and then once you see it, it's like, of course, it's so clear in the choice of Rashi's words that there's something that there's a position to take in this halacha, and it actually is a question that we asked in the beginning of the Sikha. So let's do it. By various different dinim, where they are put together of different elements of 2 elements that are dependent one on another. Often the question is raised. Was is der Iker Prat v'Sibe, und was is der Prat mesuvev? What is the primary element of this mitzvah and the cause? And what is the secondary element and their effect? In other words, if you say I need 2 things, for example, not the example that he brings in the Sikha, but let's say you have Shalyad and Shorosh. Now these are they're not really totally zebazah, so it's not really a good example. But this one is one ikir, is the other one ikir? What happens if they're totally zebazah? You need them both. How do you know which one is the main one, which one is the more important one, and which one is only the result of that one? Let's learn a dugma. Ula dugma. Bashtei alechem, was mis makir v'chag hashvuos, is der din as der zar zayin mincha chadasha from the tvua chadasha. But the shtei alechem, the 2 breads that were brought on Shavuos, the only breads that were chametz, the only time that there was chametz in the Beis Hamikdash, It says mincha chadasha, it has to come from the new season of grain. Und fahr die Shtei Alechem, torment von Tvua chadasha, nit makriv sein kin ander mincha in Beis HaMikdash. And before the Shtei Alechem was brought, the halacha is you're not allowed to bring any other mincha from the Tvua chadasha. So the mashal, even though the new season began, they would continue to bring the carbon mincha from the wheat, from the yashan, from the wheat, the flour from the previous season. Stellt sich die Shaila. Was ist da der Iker v'siba? Which is the primary one here? Zieh das ist din Shtei Alechem. As they müssen sein die erste mincha von der Neue Tvua. Is the main din here with regards to the Shtei Alechem that they have to be the first? Und als Mesuve von dem Tormented Makriv sein von Chodesh kan ander mincha. And as an outcome of that, any other one cannot be, any other mincha cannot use the new grain. Oh, that's a din menachas. As a darfan haben amatir. Or it's a din in menachas that you have to have a carbon that opens up the permission for using Tvua Chadasha. Kedem is omegen makriv zayin the menachas von min hachadash mus frier zayin the akrav Shtei Alechem min hachadash. In order to be able to start bringing other menachas from the new grain, you have to first have Shtei Alechem. Shtei Alechem opens the door. Das heißt, das was die Shtei Alechem seine die erste von der Tvua Chadasha ist es zu lieb mati sein durch dem menachas min hachadash. The fact that Shtei Alechem has to be from the new grain is not a din in Shtei Alechem. It's a din in menachas. The menachas needs the Shtei Alechem to be first. So it's a very simple question. Is it a din in Shtei Alechem that they have to be the first? Or is it a din in menachas that menachas needs the Shtei Alechem to be the first? One of the relevances of this chakira, if they went ahead and they brought a mincha from Tvua Chadasha, does the prohibition to bring a different mincha before the Shtei Alechem, before Shavuos, from the new Tvua, does that prohibition still stand? The time is was Shtei Alechem da sein die erste von der Neue Tvua. Wie baut die Shtei Alechem kenne ich in sei wie nicht sein die erste. Ist mir schön ist kinisser. Ist bemele schön ist bemele schön ist shaykh kinisser in them. Und wir machen dann mit noch von der Tvua Chadasha. If it's about the Shtei Alechem that they have to be first, they're not first there anymore. That can't happen anymore. So we might as well bring other menachos from the Tvua Chadasha. If the reason is that it's a din Shtei Alechem, that the Shtei Alechem have to be first. Sorry. If it's a din in mincha, that mincha, no mincha is allowed to be brought before the Shtei Alechem, is there Yisrael echt nachtem, wie Moshe makik mit mincha chadasha. Because Mama did gebracht the Shtei Alechem, is nicht der Matter zu bringen minchas mit chadash. If it's a din in Shtei Alechem, let's go back a second because I was a little confused. If it's a din in Shtei Alechem, that they have to be first. Once you brought a different mincha, they're not first anymore. So now that din is impossible to keep. You might as well bring the other minchas. But if it's a din in menachas, that menachas need the Shtei Alechem to be first, then even though you brought a different one, the Shtei Alechem still have to wait for Shtei Alechem. The no mincha is allowed to be brought before Shtei Alechem. So if you brought one, doesn't mean you can bring the others. So again, if it's a din in Shtei Alechem, that once you brought a different mincha, then that din can't be kept anymore. You might as well bring the other minachas from the Chadash. But if it's a din in menachas, then you're not allowed to bring any mincha before the Shtei Alechem. So just because you brought one mincha doesn't mean you can bring other minachas. So this was just an example to explain this concept of how you could have two halachas that are dependent one on another, and it's sometimes difficult to identify which is the primary and which is the secondary. And we can have a similar question in our discussion. There's a chiyuv that you have to light the menorah from the mizbeach hachitzon. Is this a din in adlakas menorah? Is it a detail in the din of menorah as the eisha menorah that zayin from mizbeach hachitzon? that the menorah cannot be lit from anything else besides from the Mizbeach HaChitzen. Oder das Achiyuv, was ist gesagt geworden, mit Parsas am Mizbeach, und Mele negeert dem Mizbeach, von ihm darf man nehmen, dem Eish anzuzünden dem menorah. Or is it a din in Mizbeach, that the Mizbeach has to provide fire for the menorah? Is it a din in menorah the menorah needs to get from the Mizbeach? Or is it a din in Mizbeach the Mizbeach has to give to the menorah? And one of the relevances that you might find over here, if for some reason there's no fire in the Mizbeach, see this ma'akiv deadlock of the menorah, does it stop the kindling of the menorah? If it's a din in menorah, the menorah has to be lit from Mizbeach. So you don't have the fire that you need for the menorah, then you can't light the menorah. But if it's a din in Mizbeach, the Mizbeach has to provide fire for the menorah. Therefore, is kommen as b'shas is nicht in Mizbeach, fällt up der chiyuv und is matak menorah for an ander eish. Then that would imply that if you don't have eish Mizbeach, then the Mizbeach is out of the picture. So the menorah could go from anywhere else. If it's a din in Mizbeach, then if the Mizbeach doesn't have fire, so it can't give to the menorah is now free to go and get fire from something else. So which one is it? So this is the chkira, this is the question with regards to this chiyuv. Is it a prat in menorah, or is it a prat in Mizbeach? Al derech halacha is mashma, das adin in adlakas eish shel menorah, as a darf kumah from Mizbeach HaChitzen. The simplest way to understand this, and if you look in halacha, in the way that Rambam writes about it, and others, it would imply that it's a din of menorah. That the menorah needs to be kindled with the eish of the Mizbeach. Aber, von dem, was Rashi is Mishana von Lashon Razal, Rashi changes. Chazal say, eish tamid shal marti lecha. This eish tamid, this fire that I told you, the tamid, which is the fire of the menorah, should be taken from the top of the Mizbeach. That's how the Gemara says it. Rashi changes and schreibt, af hi mei ala Mizbeach HaChitzen tukad, she too should be lit from the Mizbeach HaChitzen. Is mashma ados as adin in Mizbeach HaChitzen, that it's a detail in the Mizbeach. As sein eish darf eich, wie andere Yekid is da, sein der was von ihm wird gesund und der Eish amener. If Rashi says afi, this too should be lit from the Mizbeach HaChitzen, is mashma that it's just like the other Yekidis in this parsha. It's a detail in Mizbeach. So although al pi halacha, the mashmos is, the understanding is that it's a prat, it's a detail in the din of menorah, the way Rashi phrases it, especially since he's changing the phraseology of the Gemara and writes af hi me'al Mizbeach HaChitzen tukad, Rashi is implying that the lighting of the menorah from the Mizbeach is a din in Mizbeach. Ubefrat as sich mit Parsha Ksuvim Kanal. Hier ist die Teira hat gestellt dem Limit in der Parsha, wo es redt sich wegen dem Eish from Mizbeach HaChitzen, nicht in Parsha Menorah, and this fits in very well with the fact that the Teira puts it here. If this was a detail in Menorah, the Teira would have written about it in Menorah, in the Parsha of Menorah. The fact that the Teira writes it here in Parsha Mizbeach is to tell us this prat, that this is a din, this din is a prat in Mizbeach. And this therefore answers the question: why mitamol in the middle of din Mizbeach is there a din about the menorah? And the answer is that according to Rashi, according to the halacha, it is a din in Mizbeach, even though it's talking about lighting the menorah, but it's one of the yikidos. It's one of the fires. It's one of the, not actually one of the marachis, but it's one of the fires of the Mizbeach, that the fire of the Mizbeach burnt the karbonis. The fire of the Mizbeach gave fire to the Mizbeach HaPnimi to burn the Ketores. The fire of the Mizbeach was there for according to some opinions, for the Evodim Ubdarim, and the fire of the Mizbeach was there to light the menorah. Let's learn an incredible hit of Avidas Hashem. The kelim was einen given Mishkan Mikdash teilen sich bechlolus of tzei. There's two types of kelim in the Mishkan Mikdash. The kelim was einen gestanden bifnim, those that were on the inside of the Kodesh, which is the Mizbeach HaPnimi, the inner Mizbeach, Beneder v'Shulchan. And then there's those that were on the outside of the Mizbeach Achitzin, the outside of the Kodesh, or the outside of the Mishkan, which is the outer Mizbeach. In Avedis Adam, Avedis Adam, this refers to two different levels, two different manners of serving Hashem. The Avedim Mitzich Bifnim, the Pnim, those Avedis that were inside, represent the Aveda that a person does with himself. When the Aveda Satan Pales and Afatzveit Niden, and then there's the Aveda to impact and to work with another Yid. So Mekarev sein Eich Div sein in Chutz und Chelke Bachutz Oilam Bedugmas Mizbeach Achitzin. To be Mekarev those Yidden that are on the outside, to Mekarev the part of him that's on the outside, which is similar to Mizbeach Achitzin. Was Davka Af Emat Memakrik and the Kapanos von Al Yidden, which Mizbeach Achitzin is the one that upon it was offered the karbanos of all the Yidden. Thus is their art from Bidr Niyonei Elam. That is where the world is refined and cleansed. So generally speaking, you have Chitzin and Pnimi. Pnimi is working with yourself, and Chitzin is working with other people. But more specifically, Adlaka Samaneda is the Inyan HaTeira. The lighting of the Manera refers to the learning of Teira. When I've demonstrated lahalis ner talmud that the ner was constant or consistent, v'chiyu talmud Torah mashenkin mitzvahs, like the chiyu talmud Torah, which is at all times, not like mitzvahs that have specific times for them. Especially a person that's terasiyim nasa, his trade is his Torah. A person who learns Torah constantly, it's ner talmud. You're a constant flame. You're constantly connected with the Eibishter. So a Torah scholar, a Torah student, someone who's involved in learning of Torah could claim he is a fully kindled meneder. And he's involved in Torah constantly. He does not need to do mitzvahs. Even if it's a passing mitzvah that he won't be able to do later on, he says, I'm busy with Torah. I don't have to do mitzvahs. I have my kesher with Hashem through learning Torah. If he's considering not doing mitzvahs by himself, certainly he thinks that he has no connection to the outside world. Or that I feel him with that Satan Eden. Even to involve himself with another Yid that compared to his level, the other Yid is considered an outsider. So that person could think. You have inside and outside. I'm busy with myself. I'm busy learning Torah. I'm taking care of myself. I don't have time to do mitzvahs. Chas v'shalom. Or I don't have time to work to help another Yid. Of them come to Yera. This is the lesson that could be learned from the fact that the Menay is kindled from the Mizbeach. Unavad is the Mizbeach HaPnimi. Certainly you have the Mizbeach HaPnimi, the Aveda Nailis, Funaiden Mitzich, the very important concept of a person working with himself. Aber der Eira Meneda zieht sich an nicht zum Mizbeach HaPnimi. Chatscher ist gestanden besamachlei. Das ist the Aveda HaPnimi Salef. So even though you have a Mizbeach HaPnimi, which is the Aveda of the person working on himself, and it's right there, the Mizbeach HaPnimi is right there next to the Meneda. Nevertheless, the Meneda does not get kindled from that. Now, Davki from Mizbeach HaChitzin, the Meneda needs to get lit from Mizbeach HaChitzin. Nachmer. But Divrei Rashi Kumatoi says that Eish, noch Zayendik after Mizbeach HaChitzin, is a Sheva Budim and Deisha Meneda. According to what we said before in Sivav, that the din of lighting the Meneda from the Mizbeach is a din in Mizbeach, that means that while it's still on the Mizbeach, it is already connected to the Meneda. In the meaning von Avedis Adam, if the Torah scholar wants that that the fire of Torah, the light of Torah, should kindle and shine in his life, so brennen und leichten dem Nereweinisch was Adam. It has to be important to him that the Yid who's on the outside, that his fire of Hashem, his neshama should burn, should shine. Und demult erst can aufleichten sein Ner Hashem mit Ner HaTorah, and only then could he, only if the Mizbeach is lit, only if the Mizbeach, which represents the chutz, which represents the person on the outside, only if that is lit, that is shining, that is on fire, only then could he light his own menorah and get involved to connect to Hashem through the light of Torah. zu abgeben sich mit dem Chutz, is if I say feel negeya, and this connection between Menorah and Mizbeach, this importance of the person being involved and dedicating himself to working with the outside world is so important. Das Wert nirmis in unser Pasuk mit dem Wort Tamid. That it's being alluded to, it's being mentioned with the word Tamid. Weil der Linie von Tamid, der Tmidis in der Rabbi von Yeshiv Eil, wird bei ihm aufgetan, dafke durch dem, was geht durch eigene Szenen und Schwierigkeiten von Chutz. Und vernimmt sich mit Peil sein Eich auf andere Iden. Because the constantness of the Yeshiv Eil, that he wants to learn Torah, and he wants to be constantly involved with Torah, it could only be accomplished if he struggles with the chutz to try to impact and influence those other Yidden, that they should get involved in learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. Demolt, der Grechten in seiner Weide von Limit Torah to the Meile von Tmidius. Only then could he reach through his own learning to the level of Tmidius, to the level of constantly learning Torah. And he brings in the Haaretz, he brings that it says, Yoiv Prutalani Vadar Matzli, that the order of the day is first tzedakah, then tefillah, and then Mibes HaKnesses, then Torah. In other words, before you learn Torah, you have to daven. Before you have to daven, you have to give a Prutalani. You have to look at the chutz, and you have to help the chutz. Then he also brings another 47, that Rabbi, who was Terasiyum Nasei, it says the first thing that he did when he came out of the Ma'ara, the second time, is he fixed something. He was Metzayin, which Kvarim, which places they couldn't walk. The point was, he was helping people. After coming out of the Ma'ara after 13 years, his first thing that he did was to help people. Because a Chelek of Terasim Nasei, almost a Yesoid, a precursor to Terasim Nasei, to the Kesher Tmidi with Hashem, is to care about another Yid, and to help another Yid, and to be involved in the Chutz. That is what kindles his Ner Hashem, his Menorah, his Ner Tamid.